Hey guys, quick little announcement for Fishing the DMV. Our Weekend Warrior membership group on Patreon is nearly full. There are only 20 spots still available. Once these spots are gone, they're gone, and I'll be closing the club to any new members until 2026. At that point, you can try to join again, but it'll be at a higher rate. So get your rates locked in now, and you'll gain access to our 5 fishing tournaments each year for Patreon members only, 5% off your orders to Jake's Bait and Tackle, 10% off your order to Tiger Crankbaits, 10% off your orders to Catoctin Creek Rods. You'll gain access to our private Facebook group community, loads of members only content, and of course, ad-free, commercial-free episodes of the show. You get all this for $6 a month, which is less than a pack of Cincos or a Jackhammer Chatterbait. Lock in these rates now because in 2026, I'm going to be increasing the rate to new members. And again, I'll give you an extra one here. I'll give you 8% off if you buy the membership for the year. So that'll be $66 for all of this value. There are only a few spots left, so hurry up and check out the link in the episode description.
You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your host, Thomas Ahrens. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jake's Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.
If that doesn't get you jacked up, I don't know what will.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Fishing the DMV. I'm your host, Thomas Ahrens, and today we have a really special guest. We are pre-recording this at the Augusta County Fishing Show Day 2, and this is to help get prepped for the Fishing Pro Tech Open House. And I have the man, the myth, the legend. Lynn, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. Good morning to everybody from the Augusta County Fishing Show in Fishersville. Day 2, final day. Glad to be here. And glad
the one thing I kept getting messages about is like you didn't even scratch the surface of the stories that you have to offer the world, and you have so much more cool things to talk about. And so really I just wanted this kind of conversation to really delve into all the cool experiences that you've had.
Okay, there's been several. I'll share one real quickly. The 1993 Bassmasters Classic, Greensboro, North Carolina, first year that Brian Kerschel qualified the very challenging way through the Federation Club ranks. And he's fishing, and I was doing the show. I had a small 10-foot booth, and my dad was with me, and I'm a lifetime member of that organization, so we are festooned with exhibitor credentials, lifetime member stuff. I think my dad was kicking the old school patch vest back in the day, and we're at the Waffle House. Might have been final day of the Classic. And we're getting ready to cash out and leave, and a couple in a booth up from us says, stop my dad and I. Hey, we're Brian Kerschel's parents. I'm like, really? They driven like all night from, I think, Connecticut or somewhere in this little beater car. And I just stopped in my tracks and said, guys, first thing I got to share with you, the fact your son is here is the bragging right. He got here the hard way through the Federation ranks. I mean, this is now especially equivalent to Super Bowl or the Wimbledon in pro bass fishing. I said, you've got, top flight pros. The biggest challenge even for them is to separate the high level of competition and the whole festivity side of things. But just to meet them was just a big bonus in that show. And then one other story from that show, I was married at the time, and my wife, Chrissy, and my father with me, again, modest little 10-foot booth. And I knew that Doug Hannon was going to be the bass professor. I think it was Odessa, Florida. A hell of a notoriety. I had all of his books. Guy was a genius. And I mentioned to my wife, I said, hey, Chrissy, while you're walking around and browsing and stuff, if you just happen to see Doug Hannon, bring him over to the booth. I look up moments later, so cool. Here she comes with Doug Hannon, the bass professor. And out of all his books, guys, I recommend, I believe it was the book called Big Bass Magic, was particularly good. The guy was just so dialed in. The Literal Zone is what he nicknamed his boat. It was just insane to meet him. I don't have it with me, obviously, but I've got a picture. I blew up into an 8x10 of Doug Hannon, and I'll never forget his shirt had a image of a bass on it, and the fonts read, "I fish, therefore I am." And it was just neat to meet him, get a picture. That was just another highlight.
I mean, we talk about this in almost any sport, the good old days. Was that like peak Bassmaster Classic back then, or do you think the Classic now is still at that same level?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to say it's still at that same level. The crowds that the event itself is drawing, and then, like I say, I've done the show twice, and the turnout to the show, and whether it's a high-level pro that's qualified to compete in that, or anyone else really, in the industry or fishing at a pro level, is going to be there with sponsorship commitments or competing in the event. I know Mike Iaconelli, Lou Daves, they've both won it. And let's take Mike, for example, South Jersey guy. I'm a Jersey kid. He told me his speaking engagement fee had quadrupled right after winning the Classic. He had a bunch of already good sponsorships. So your current sponsorship ramps up dramatically. More fishing-related sponsorship jumps on board, and then the non-endemics come in. Liquor, beer, footwear, Under Armour, people like that. So it's a big. The whole flavor is a little different, but it's still. Again, now I feel it's equivalent to Super Bowl or Wimbledon. It's the big.
And I don't want to derail from all the stories that we have lined up today, but the Forest Wood Cup, it's no longer here, and I feel like it's sad because I never got to experience one of those events, and I don't know if you have, but okay, so then you can talk about that, like the comparison, because that was one of the first $500,000 tournaments. They had $1 million one year that they did it. I mean, was that at any level like it was the Classic, or was it like sub tier?
Same level. That was a very successful, I believe, multi-billionaire named Irwin Jacobs ends up owning Genmar. Genmar at the time owned Ranger Boats. Ranger was in a little bit of a slump sales-wise, so he came in with his, clout, power, persuasion, financial capacity. What can I do to help Genmar sell more of these Ranger boats? He kept approaching Walmart. Now, this is for the original FLW circuit, and that's Forest Wood's initials. And he was responsible. He kept reaching out to Walmart, and they weren't that interested. And they finally told him, Irwin, sit down and write us a letter like you've never approached us about the subject before, which he did, and they came on. The first sponsor that jumped on board, Fujifilm. Nobody had a Smarty Pants film with a camera in it back then. They gave, I think, the circuit $10 million and as many disposable cameras as they wanted. And it was a brilliant strategy. You take your free disposable camera, take a bunch of pictures, you go to Walmart to have the film developed. They call you when the pictures are ready to pick up. That's now the second trip to Walmart. You might buy a few things. And then that one's a lot of non-endemic. Snickers candy. I saw a graphic rack boat, Snap, Crackle, and Pop from the cereal. Randy Blockett, I met him through Megabass. He had the yellow Land O'Lakes butter boat. The president of Yamaha was there. A lot of smaller independent dealers like myself, boat companies, sunglass companies. It was their equivalent to the Bassmasters Classic. $500,000 was paid out. Dave Dudley won that event. It was in 2003. And and now they've got a different name for it now. Yeah. It's not the Jacobs Cup anymore.
I think it's now the Red Crest because FLW kind of got absorbed.
Same thing.
But yeah, it's crazy how many sponsors they had back in the day. Like again, like you said, like Walmart, of course, the big example. Yes,
Lowry Salt, Land O'Lakes Butter, Polon Chainsaws, the National Guard. The list goes on and on. Walmart had little Ranger boats, extremely detailed, which I had several of them. I got Randy Blockett to sign a couple of them from me. They were incredibly detailed little Ranger boats with the trailer on it, the trolling motor and everything. I mean, it was a big deal.
Not to be pessimistic, but were those the good old days of non-endemic sponsors? It's just insane, the list that you just rattled off. Wow. Yeah, that is crazy. Anyway, sorry guys at home that are listening to this, but I didn't want to derail that, but I find that fascinating because we don't give the Forest Wood Cup because it's gone now. It's a relic of the past, but that used to be the big summer deal back in the day. I remember it.
Red Quest is what they call it now, I would like to see a giant flow chart sometime, how BASS and FLW and all these other, you've got, it's exciting, it's good for a lot of people. You've got a lot more women competing at a high level, a lot more nationwide fishing license sales are up. I've been doing this for 30 years. There was a big period where it was a big major slump. COVID actually gave it a boost. A lot of more people started fishing again. And it's nice that you've got not just the granddaddy BASS circuit. You had FLW that's morphed into other things, other tournament circuits. There's a bunch in Alabama, Texas, comes to mind, Cali, a whole different world, and high-level tournaments, high-level tournament competition, and more non-endemic sponsorship. You'll get somebody with the notoriety and high profile of a Kevin Van Dam. You've got Yeti coolers and footwear and beer companies, liquor companies, candy. It's unbelievable.
It really is exciting.
It's exciting.
No, sorry guys, I didn't mean to derail from the stories that you had lined up for us. But what's another story that you have for us?
I used to do a 4-day show in Toano, Maryland, just north of Baltimore. I sat on the waiting list for 4 years, like pursuing a college degree to get into this show. And once you're in, it's like getting jumped into the mafia. You're in and you're protected. That show was absolutely phenomenal. I dubbed it the land of disposable income. I'm an old Jersey kid. You had Jersey, New York, PA, Canada, DC Loop area, Maryland proper, Virginia, all came out to that show. There was no online ordering back then. You went to a show to, prep for your tournaments and get ready for the season to kick in. And at one point, Don Iovino was there, the godfather of finesse fishing from California. He had the motel room right beside me. The man is hilarious. I had Don Iovino in the house, Lou Daves. He won the Classic in 2000. I think he's living in, I believe, Hopewell, Virginia, a Virginia guy. And then Peter Tilaveros, Peter T., Florida guy, fishing the pro level. Final day of the show, it was a 4-day grinder. You had to load in, set up, in 4 long days. Worthwhile endeavor, incredible show. And we were all staying in the same hotel. Back then, I was doing 3 to 5 shows between January and February. It was like running away and joining the circus. You're all at the same show. You're staying in the same hotels. You're all dining in the same restaurant. I had the unbelievable pleasure. This is like a dream come true. It just happened to congeal one morning, final morning of that show, getting ready to cash out, check out, finish the show, go home, go back to my store. I had the privilege of having breakfast with Lou Daves, Peter Tilaveros, and Don Iovino, just casually sitting there at a breakfast buffet in the motel.
Yeah.
What an opportunity. It was just to chat with them casually as just buddies and friends, and just what they had accomplished even at that point in their careers. That's just been another highlight of doing this over the years. That was pretty exciting. Another time at the Classic, while I'm thinking about it, my dad was there. I think we were walking towards the restrooms or something. Here comes Ray Scott, all by himself. Rest in peace, Ray. I mean, that impact he and Forrest Wood had, those two men, the impact on a sport and an industry, I don't think we'll ever see it again. What those men accomplished is still, the concentric rings are still just reverberating out what they did. But to meet him, first of all, and while chatting with him, up walks Mark Hildebrandt of the Hildebrandt Bait Company that had been around like forever. And Ray Scott introduces me to Mark Hildebrandt at the Classic. And Mark says, "Oh, Ray, I just received some pictures from Lynn that he sent me. One of his home lakes in Virginia, he couldn't buy a bite on a spinnerbait till he started throwing the Bernie Schultz designed the blade spinnerbait with my Hildebrandt blades on it." I mean, what a neat encounter and a neat memory to share with you all these years later.
Yeah.
You got to see my scrapbook someday. I got some photos.
I want to ask a question about Forrest Wood, but first, was there ever, who was the person that was the most, you were starstruck? I once got to see Randy Johnson up close when he was with the Diamondbacks as a kid, and he walked by and said, "How you doing?" And I was literally felt like I got sick to my stomach because he looked at me. That will always be ingrained in my head. Did you ever have that moment you met somebody, you're like, "You're looking at me"?
Several times. I don't even know where to start. I think the podcast we did the other show, meeting Yuki Ito, at store level comes to mind immediately. But Ray Scott, Mark Hildebrandt, Andre Moore, that is the founder of Reaction Innovations, Lee Sisson, who was retired and living in Florida. He was doing the Sisson baits, but Lee designed the original B series of crankbaits, highly coveted, for Jim Bagley. It was Winter Park or Winter Haven, Florida. Meeting him, Minoru Sagawa, I met him at the Classic. He's pretty much the Mac Daddy of Lucky Craft. Met Ish Monroe there, several other pros. Seigo Seito was my Bait Breath rep. That was a soft plastic company from Japan. I met him, and he is now the main photographer for BASS, because I believe Gerald Crawford was the gentleman's name. He retired. You'll see a lot of picture credits throughout all their publications. Seigo Seito, just meeting him was fantastic. At Ranger Jacob Cup, I met Toshinori Namiki, He's like a rock star in Japan. He's got the OSP company, Osprey Spiritual Performer. I am the first U.S. dealer
Really?
for OSP, so that was kind of. He spoke fluent English, which was a huge bonus, and he had 3 of his man fans had come in on their own dime to watch him. They were wearing the samurai headbands at the launch each morning. And one of my tournament buddies said, "Would you like to meet Toshi?" I said, "Absolutely." Jerry Francis was his name. I call him Saint Jerry now. And he said, "Here comes Toshinori Namiki, laden with tackle and rods. 3 other guys from his fan base that flew in on their own dime from Japan and cracked open one of his tackle boxes in front, and the louvered layers of this crankbait
so cool.
up and down. And next thing I know, I'm the first U.S. dealer. So that's another kind of cool thing that went down. But starstruck, not so much that I find most of them very approachable, like sitting here and chatting with you. Ike Anelli, Hank Parker, Forrest Wood, his wife Nina, all these people, just very, very casual, very, very approachable, very low key and polite and courteous.
For people that
Been a lot of
aren't
fun.
100% aware, what was a broad overview of Forrest Wood's impact on the sport? Because I think people just potentially just recognize him for like, oh, he's the logo on Ranger boats. Was it just the boats that he did, or was there conservation as well?
A combination of both, and the collaborations with Ray Scott. And the first thing that comes to mind, maybe a lot of people aren't aware of, is the old slogan, "We still build them one at a time." The safety features that he introduced that are still in effect today, that are probably impacted the whole boating industry, with being able to have one of their boats with like 6 guys standing in it and a big chunk of the hull cut away and all standing on one side and the boat is still level. So it really pushed the needle on improving the live wells capacities. The overall safety comes to mind. And that famous story when Randy Hopper was on his staff as a young school kid, cleaning up after a day's work at their plant in Flippin, Arkansas, was sweeping up, and we've all done, he's kind of scooting around with the push broom, and something was hesitant to come off the floor, and he scuffed it with his foot, ignited one spark, and that's what started that famous fire that they had. Forrest was just glad that no one was hurt, because back then it was the molds, the hazmat suit, the big chopper gun, spraying fiberglass into the molds. One little spark, that could have been a lot more devastating. He was just glad no one was injured. And the kind of cool part of that story was the next morning or next day, they nailed the phone to a tree and never missed a beat. Kind of a neat story. But the safety comes to mind. And just him being, I think he was guiding at one point, and and he named Ranger after the
I didn't know
Texas
that.
Rangers. That's how he come. And he even had a little bit less, more of a budget brand, if you will, like a more of an entry level called Rawhide. That lasted for, I don't know exactly, but I remember seeing some ads for the Rawhide made by Ranger. Yeah.
I didn't know
Flippin',
that. That is
Arkansas.
really wild.
Uh-huh.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
I mean, guys, there you go. I mean, there's a little tidbit that the historical context of fishing is fascinating to me. It is.
deep.
And
It's
then
very
like
deep.
the Japanese angle that we dabbled in last time. When did Japan start getting on the radar, or let's say for you and people like you on the East Coast?
For me, it was an article I still have on my scrapbook. It was the BASS Times publication, kind of like almost like a little tabloid that comes out between each issue of Bassmaster. Had an article maybe this big: new high-end bait Japan phenomena from Japan baits, and little article. And then Masaki Murayama in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, was the U.S. rep at that time. He had an ad about the size of a matchbook cover in the back. And I reached out to him and became one of their dealers 30 years ago. And the Japanese, just that culture, I don't care if you pick up the trash, you're a brilliant brain surgeon, a bait designer, everything, a busboy, everything they do is approached like an art form. Very conscientious, polite, courteous, and very well accomplished. Everything is done at just
It's
a very
that
high
meticulous
level.
nature. Everything they do is to the T.
Attention to detail.
And
Yeah,
it's
very
fascinating.
meticulous.
To me, it's always like, so I always go back to the example of Moneyball, that there was a point in time where people didn't believe in statistics, which is weird because today it's like baseball, it's all it is. But there was a moment a guy had to think like, this is a good way of doing it. There was a time where the Japanese culture wasn't over here in fishing. And that to me is fascinating. People like you that like took the leap of, this is an idea. And there's always those people that back then is like, oh, that's crazy, it's not going to catch on. But you have those early pioneers like, I don't know, this might be a thing. And
I got very fortunate, lucky, blessed, all the above. I think this is going to be a big deal. There was, I think, probably a small handful of us, 3 to 5 guys nationwide, that thought, we're going to roll the dice and give this stuff a try. And sure enough, 30 years later, the empire Yuki Ito has built, the traction that Lucky Craft still maintains, OSP, G-Crack, I could go on and on, unbelievable. What helped them also in their own country was they have an emperor, not a president. And for a long time, our beloved largemouth bass was considered a trash fish. It was like a sucker or a carp. So the emperor was not recognizing anybody pushing the needle or literally doing award-winning type stuff, pushing the needle, getting a lot of patents granted, stuff like that, until a later time. I don't know the specific times, but now, Yuki Ito, I stopped counting at like 62 Japan Good Design Awards. He gets them quite frequently for his rod design. So now with the emperor recognizing, hey, there's a lot of people in Japan, in our country, in our culture, that are brilliant and need to be recognized. That helped raise the profile. And then most of the cutting trends of stuff coming from Japan seem to land in Cali, out west, and then just work their way eastbound. The drop shotting technique, finesse work. Now it's just that a lot of the finesse work, the deep water drop shotting, scaling down. It's unbelievable.
Do you think was drop shotting the first big Japanese technique that caught on over here? Do you think, or what was, in your opinion, the first big Japanese technique that caught on?
Might have not have been the first, but the one that really caught fire, and the person fanning the flames out of fire was Aaron Martins, and that was the drop shotting. He just was such a brilliant person. It's a shame he's no longer with us. He really put that on the map. Then again, I gotta mention Don Iovino's name, known as the godfather of finesse fishing in California. He was doing they called them sissy baits back in the day. It was the little tiny reapers, little tiny worms, little tiny finesse jigs, stuff of that nature. The doodling technique. He was one of the first guys to raise the profile of the drop shotting, brass and glass, where you had an 8mm faceted glass bead of your choice of color with a little brass disc, and just deep water, clear water techniques.
What is doodling? Oh, that's okay.
What I just
gotcha.
described, where you're just kind of doodling, with the smaller finesse baits were called sissy baits back in the day. Little reapers, little teeny worms.
And so a lot of that, I guess, evolved into BFS, what we consider BFS. Yeah.
Bait finesse system, major deal in Japan. A huge tsunami as we speak of that trending into the U.S. market, especially with giving an extra kick in the pants with the forward-facing sonar.
And that has caught on crazy in Japan, and how good they are at it. I mean, pound for pound, people like to say like a Patrick Walters and people like that, a Milliken maybe is great with forward-facing sonar. Guys in Japan that come over, they are surgeons with that technology. It's insane how they just embrace so much stuff and then come back and they're like 10 times better.
Mm-hmm. Like Hunter mentioned, it is the advancement of the technology, and they're so dedicated. Like I said, everything they do over there is approached like an art form. So, and there's a lot of fishing pressure. Lake Biwa, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, is very challenging. But also, a gentleman caught what I guess the powers that be are determining to be a tie with the world record largemouth. The video of that guy lifting that fish out of the cooler,
this monster,
was almost frightening. It's considered a tie. I think it might have weighed 1 ounce more, but I think they wanted to consider it to be a new world record if it was 4 ounces or heavier. There's a little controversy, I think, still swirling around over that. But,
that's a culture I definitely want. A bucket list would be to go over there and experience fishing in that culture. I think over here we do get a little spoiled. And I guess because I've had guys, some of my best friends in college were Michigan and Ohio born, and they fish basically ponds for BFLs. And over here we get spoiled when it's like, well, this lake is not big enough. But like in Ohio and Japan, it's like we got 2 ponds. Like that's it. And I think that mindset is so impressive when you can't. I remember one of the anglers, he explained this to a translator. It's like, over here we just assume there's fish and we just have to figure them out, versus here it's like people just leave and go find the fish, and their mindset is so different how they approach the water. It's fascinating.
Yeah. You'll see them standing in a culvert off the edge of a road with the rod hanging over a guardrail, working their way through weedy brush, a backpack on loaded with tackle, a couple little rods. They make multi-piece travel rods that all break down, go into a little briefcase. So they'll take their sandwich and their lunch from their IT job in an office, and we'll go down to the park, fish in the little park water that they got. It's very
That's
dedicated.
so cool. What other? I see you got your notepad there. What are other stories that we have?
Let me see, stories. Just met so many incredible people. To keep in mind that any of these pros at any event or anything, they're not rock stars. They're all very approachable. I'm at a blank trying to think of any other stories. There's a bunch of them. I just met.
Did you always go to ICAST, or what was your first experience at like an ICAST event, if you did go?
Okay, yeah, my ICAST, which is the used to be called AFTMA, the American Federation of Tackle Manufacturers Association. That's a big mouthful. Now it's just simply called ICAST. It used to be, and would rotate around to. I went in the late '90s in Vegas. It used to be in Chicago quite a bit. Now I think most years it's in Orlando, Florida, because you've got a subtropical climate year-round. The facility is incredible. You could land a plane in that place. And then people with families and stuff can double down. You're right there by Disney also. So, yeah, we go every year. We get up at the crack of dawn and fly out of Richmond and get down there. And you just give them your name. You're pre-registered. You get some NIC credentials. You can walk around like a rock star for 3 days. Nothing's for sale, but the scope of some of those displays. You come down a huge bank of escalators, and there was the Garmin display. I thought I was looking at the Sphinx. And I'm like, the immense size and heat that these Shimano does Jackal's U.S. distribution.
I didn't know that.
They're combined. When we first we run like a scalded dog to go to Daiwa/Evergreen. They do Evergreen International's U.S. distribution. And you've got small new people with just a little 10-foot display trying to gain some traction. A lot of just people that make tungsten want to be there. It's everything. It's high-end, expensive, custom-made offshore fighting chairs. I saw a treble hook that was like this big around and this tall. I'm like, that's a big treble hook. And I met the owner of G-Crack and Hiroshi Nishine. I'm his first U.S. dealer. He and his buddy are buddies of ours. And I take one of my part-time guys who's a brilliant engineer. And just to hear the exchange he has with like Satoshi Ito, I am R&D with Daiwa and Evergreen, and just to watch these two guys have an exchange of aerodynamics, hydrodynamics, wind shear, metallurgy, the conductivity of different metals, the extrusion process of fluorocarbon. I live minutes away from the second oldest learning institution in this country, William & Mary. I can't go down there and take a course on what I just absorb like a sponge, watching my brilliant engineer friend and all these heavy hitters with all these major companies have their exchange. I just soak it up like a sponge.
Why is it certain companies innovate and other companies seem not to innovate as much, surviving on just kind of like either copycatting or just doing what works? It's interesting that I feel like a lot of companies have lost their way with that. And I personally think it's like they're just risk averse. They're no longer... They're corporate versus creative. You look at like Steve Jobs that comes around and it's like, I have this idea for a product. And then the next guard comes in and it's like, let's just be safe and just keep doing what works.
Yeah, the real successful, truly brilliant innovators continue to push the needle. Certain people, whether they're just a lunchbox Joe working stiff, and companies, even if it's a very high degree of success, they'll reach a certain plateau, and I guess they're just content.
I agree with that.
I don't do that either.
Mm-hmm.
I continue to push the needle, just to find. Hunter and I the research never stops. I'm 50 years older than him. We learn something from each other every day. It's fascinating. But I think some people just get in a certain comfort zone and don't want to push the needle any further in their personal life, or you see again somebody like Yuki Ito with Megabass, a lot of different companies. Like
John Cruz is a good
comes
one
to mind. Virginia guy, yeah, he just keeps pushing the needle. He's a busy guy. He juggles a lot of balls in the air and just stays friendly, upbeat, highly competitive, and pushes the needle with his company. Missile Baits and Yeah, they just keep going. Some people just get to a certain stopping point and they're content where they're at, and the other ones keep innovating.
Yeah, and I think the
pushing
other
needle.
issue too is just, and this is just corporate 101, is with a patent, it's about how much money you have. I think Bass Talk Live with Mark Jeffries did an interesting thing called the $1 million idea, I believe it was, with the chatterbait, and how I'm cliff noting it, guys. You can go find it, but it was basically he had the patent and he was running out of money defending his patent, and so he partnered with Z-Man because they had the money to basically lawyer up to protect the patent. And that's crazy when the bait stealing market, where even if you say like, okay, I legally have the right to this, then you have to be able to have the money to fight to keep the right. It's bonkers how that works, and the copycatting and all that stuff.
Yeah, there's always the knockoffs. Two iCasts ago, just 2 years ago, the major negative chatter and buzz was all the knockoffs. It's always existed, and it exists in every industry. Look at cars and automobiles and trucks and stuff. You'll say, "Oh, that's a Mercedes, or that's an Audi." The taillights look alike. There's knockoffs in every industry out there. In the fishing tackle business, it's always, and there's only a 10% difference clause. That's only a dime out of a dollar. You change the direction of the louvered ribs on a base, raise or lower the profile of the eyes, as soon as you're 10% difference. The story I've heard in my travels regarding the chatterbait was there was a product from Eagle Claw called the Acre Shaker, and it was Guy Acre, Cherry Hill, I think it was, Cherry something, a North Carolina guy, early BASS pro. It was a little aftermarket blade that pretty much does what the blade on these chatterbaits does. And I believe it was a father and son. The guy was at the Raleigh show one year, and he had literally a little galvanized hog trough full of water, a little limb that went across the width of it, and a little shorty rod, and he'd pitch that little chatterbait out and hop it over the limb, and couldn't give him away. And then Brian Thrift went down shortly after that and whacked a gigantic bag of pigs in a Florida event, and it exploded. So just the story I've heard, I can't say that it's written in stone or true, but him and his son are like in a shed in their backyard or something. And this has happened a lot in the industry. And you're going to get crushed. You just can't keep up. And I believe Z-Man approached them to say, hey, we are one of two of the largest skirt manufacturers, first of all. And we're just in a position, we're just going to buy you out. We've got the manufacturing, the distribution. We've already got this gigantic skirt company. And what a remarkable thing. I mean, that everybody's throwing
as a guy, and eventually, and guys, soon we're gonna talk about his tackle shop. But as a person that owns a tackle shop, how do you distinguish between a fad and a new thing? You guessed, you betted correctly that the Japanese stuff was going to be a thing. You have the chatterbait, a whopper plopper, but for all the chatterbaits and the whopper ploppers, there's going to be duds. They're just, this is not going to last. Do you get like an instinct for what you think is going to?
You do after several years. Where this is just it's getting too repetitive. You know, this is just another either knockoff or a slightly tweaked difference from the same bait with the same company. They'll change the composition of the blade or go to a different hook or something. The initial sales can be misleading. If it's something new, everybody wants to at least try it for the first time, and you've got to be cautious of that. In my case, being a retail, we can have anything you want at dealer cost. You've got to really keep your personal preference under control. You know, I'm a crankbait junkie. I love high-end stuff from Japan. I'm not going to load my store completely of nothing but high-end Japanese baits and all crankbaits. You've got to have a good even spread of stuff. But yeah, there's always going to be a lot of knockoffs, and there, believe it or not, seems out of character to say this and share this with you, but sometimes a knockoff has actually improved the OG. Somebody else will take something like the Whopper Plopper comes to mind. Berkeley's got the Chapo.
That's a fascinating conversation that could be had. Like, when would you consider it a knockoff versus an improvement of a design? Because I feel like one is saying it in a positive light and one is saying it more in maybe a negative light. But it happens in business all the time. People improve on the automobile design, or you have something that just copy it, but it's lesser, like a Temu, so to speak. That is interesting.
And some people, as an admission of guilt, everybody has knocked off the Megabass mag draft. And he got his patent granted for that, where the magnet holds the treble hook up under the bait. and very, very effective bait. Hunter's done extremely well with it. It's got a heck of gained a lot of traction. Everybody's knocked that off. And I don't recall the company, but I think the last people that brought something out, relatively similar to it, I think it's actually called The Last Copy.
What do you think? Last thing, guys, I promise here. But what do you think of the whole glide bait culture kicking off? Because it's crazy. I've had Ricky Folk, I had Dave Smith talking about old crankbaits. I mean, you like, oh, this is $100 here, like what this one is worth now. And you get these glide bait culture where it's like, it's a brick truck worth of value in a couple of these baits. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's a fascinating culture. It's almost like a bunch of skateboard guys. It's the sleeve tattoos, certain jargon, certain slang. Like I said, a lot of tattoos, really good people. When you get really hardcore on the swim bait category, that started out in Cali, and the baits were so large that I think the hinge on the bait was a door hinge. They were massive and didn't even have any hooks on them. And they were just throwing them around experimenting. They suddenly, hey, wait a minute, we got a lot of followers. There's fish, big trophy class fish kind of following these baits and getting ready to respond. That was the whole birth of the culture. It kind of come out of Cali and swept its way over to the East Coast. The guys that get into it really deep, it's a big expenditure of money if you're getting the smaller boutique builders. Again, as this gained traction, a lot of people, more mainstream companies have put out glide baits, swim baits. That swim bait gathering, the Swim Bait Universe puts on. They had a event at my store. They reached out to me, would I like to host an event? Over 200 people came out, and it was just a great group of people.
So you were one of the first to do that, the Swim Bait Universe.
Well, they approached me. Would I be interested in? Because I think it was Toxic Baits out in Cali has a Toxic Days event, and I think it's part of the chatter and the momentum building. Reached out to the East Coast, and Wayne Campbell with Swim Bait Universe approached me about, would you be willing to host an event? I said, absolutely. I met him on a Friday before the one-day event Saturday, and then they have their tournament the following day. I said, I had no idea what kind of turnout we're going to get. Pleasure to meet you. I'd gone and gotten a porta potty in, tables, chairs, tents, and over 200 people come out to that thing, and it was fantastic. Really, really nice bunch of people. And again, very dedicated guys to that. It's a whole culture of people that are when they get really, really dedicated to it. And now a lot of mainstream companies are making good, viable baits, and a lot of the smaller boutique guys too are very talented people.
And that's interesting because it comes down to I had Phony Frogs on a while ago. He talked about like it's basically there's a secret ingredient for each person's resin. And that makes it harder to copy because everyone cooks differently. And that's also fascinating too. It's not just like a chatterbait where it's just that you attach a blade to a head and there's variance there. It's how you cook the resin itself and harden it will give it certain action. And that's fascinating because I personally was wrong. I did not think glide bait culture would take off as mainstream because of the cost and the size. And I was wrong because people are willing to buy a $100 glide bait, a $200 glide bait, and they're throwing them consistently. Or higher price. Like, I don't know what the cap is now because I was completely wrong about what the average angler would be willing to spend on a bait. I know the niche people would, but now it's like, what are we going to see with Megabass jerkbaits or other baits that could cap that figure? It's fascinating.
There's a couple that we recommend to people at store level. The River to Sea S-Waver is a good way just to jump in. The baits aren't that pricey. You don't initially need the dedicated tackle. You can take your favorite frog rod or your favorite jig rod and a 128 S-Waver from River to Sea, and that'll jump you in. I think the baits are about $20.
That's awesome stuff.
Then you can start if you want to. As soon as the deeper you want to go, like anything, it's like a set of golf clubs. You want the technique-specific rods, and it's a whole different approach. It's fascinating.
It really is, and it'll be fun to kind of watch how that culture develops. How did you come up with the name of your store, and what's the origins of that?
I agonized over the name, and I agonized over the logo. My wife at the time had minored in art in college, so I got her art easel board out, and I put the Bass Pro Shop logo on it. I love the combination of black and red. I had a couple images of leaping bass, and when I came up with Fishing Pro Tech, was the immediate identification of what we're doing, fishing. Pro for the pro level and tech for the technical side. and just decided on that, and was very dialed in to make sure the logo was just the way I wanted it. That's been tweaked a little bit over the years, but that was how I came up with it.
Interesting. And then how long have you had this, and this is a good time to promote this, you have I guess it's called an open house, is that correct?
We are calling it the first annual Fishing ProTech
There we
Tactical
go.
Bass Summit. I've been wanting to do just a single one-day event, and the idea this year was to go ahead and do it, keep the rhythm and momentum going of the couple of shows we've done, and keep that kind of going, but not be too much later where we're sitting on too many tournaments and stuff as those get going. So kind of like what we do on Black Friday, the Friday after Thanksgiving. It's a one-day event, normal store hours 8 to 6, free coffee and donuts in the morning, free pizza at lunchtime. We're going to have a raffle to win a Megabass Levante rod in a combo with a Daiwa Tatula reel. We're going to raffle that off. Various sales throughout the store. We're hoping you can join us, and several other select personalities. And as people are kind of making a commitment to it, you can monitor it on Instagram or Facebook.
Yep.
And, we're looking forward.
I'm going to be there, guys, for the meet and greet. It's Saturday, February 22nd, and it starts at 8 a.m. 8 a.m. to 6.
And goes till 6. And on that raffle, you don't have to be there. We just, as many entries as you want to get. And at the end of the day, especially if a young child is still kind of hanging out, we say, reach into the jar and pick us out a winner. Someone will get a phone call from me and say, are you ready for your day to get better? You just won that rod and reel combo. And we'll have select sales going. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Hunter will be there. I'm going to be there. There's going to be a load more people there. Just come say hi. Again, Fishing ProTech. That is February 22nd, starting at 8 a.m. I'll put a link in the episode descriptions to the store location, so you can come on and say hi. It's good. He has an amazing assortment of baits, especially the Japanese culture. You got to come take a look at it. And they're really, really some well-knowledge individuals are going to be there to really get you on the right path for whatever you're going to be doing fishing-wise. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that we forgot to cover? We gotta let the people know about.
Not that I can think of. We might come up with something maybe in the one-day event.
Yeah, we will. Lynn, thank
more.
you so much. Again, guys, go check him out. As always, guys, link in the episode description, everything that we talked about. Go check him out. I'll be there February 22nd at 8 o'clock in the morning. Link in the episode description to go check him out. And we'll see you guys next time on Fishing the DMV. Bye.
You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your host, Thomas Ahrens. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jake's Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.
If that doesn't get you jacked up, I don't know what will.